Hey everyone, thanks for bearing with the weather and joining us here. Actually, I don't think anybody left. You guys were here the whole night, right? You were just hanging out. Welcome to a wonderful panel here. We have a lot of folks that are experts in something you may have seen on Twitter or X called cNFTs. I do know, though, that we are very likely to accidentally jump into the technical part of this. We're going to try as much as possible to actually make it realistic, pragmatic, for you all people to understand what you actually use these things for. My name is John. I run the ecosystem engineering team at the Solana Foundation. And for the last year, I've spent basically getting compressed NFTs to market, which involves lots and lots of conversations, but also understanding what is it that's the product vision behind all of this. And to make it really, really succinct, companies like the Instagrams of the world wanted to mint millions of NFTs on behalf of their consumers, their creators, all that sort of stuff. But also, enterprises wanted to do this for games and every other experience. So we wanted to find a way to really reduce the cost of NFTs to basically near zero. So we've done that with compressed NFTs, and over the last year, even just since April, Drip has created 60 million collectibles. You've seen it on the charts. 96 million compressed NFTs out there for very, very little cost. So I'm happy to introduce the panel here, and I'll have them go down. Maybe start with your name and your title and what you do, what your company does.
Hey guys, my name is Richard. I'm one of the co-founders and CTO of Tensor. Maybe some of you guys have used Tensor to trade drip drops. Yeah, excited for cNFTs. I think it's really paving the way for the future of Solana.
Hey guys, my name is Mert. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Helius. Helius is an RPC provider and infrastructure provider for compressed NFTs. And if you ever go on Drip and it has a problem, it's usually my fault. And yeah.
Yeah, so hi, I'm Keith. I'm a protocol engineer for Metaplex, all cNFTs all the time. In my spare time, for some reason, I'm a glutton for punishment, so I work with cNFTs for some side projects and use it for gaming.
Awesome. Actually, that's a great point. Metaplex, as you all know, has been a massive part of the creator ecosystem here on Solana. I would love to hear a little bit more about how you and the rest of the team think about compression, compressed NFTs, and what sort of things you think the company has been talking about.
Sure. So I think we're seeing cNFTs as a chance to up our game, really. As everyone knows, I'm sure we've been focused on the creators and we've been focused on developers. We want to enable creators to do what they do best, create. And we want to enable developers to work with our tools as easy as possible. If you haven't used Yumi yet, please use Yumi. It's the best JS SDK I've ever used. And we want to make that simplicity and ease even better. Because with cNFTs, you're no longer dealing with 10K collections. You're scaling it up to the millions, the billions maybe even, in the near future. And we want to make sure that same experience for creators and developers scales. It's one of the reasons we've been talking a lot about adding a utility layer for the foundation, powered by some of the awesome people at Everstake and Underdog, where you simplify everything as much as possible. So we're meeting enterprise scale businesses where they are with API calls rather than SDK calls, hiding the blockchain, because not everyone wants you learn a new tech stack just to use something as awesome as cNFTs.
Yeah. They're definitely way too complex, so it's good to see companies that are trying to make it a lot easier. It really should just be something you push button, and it just works, and it doesn't really matter, and it's near free, so you can just provide that service.
Right.
Speaking of services, I would love to hear from your perspective as you've seen compression grow over the last year. You know, what have you thought at the beginning, maybe, and how you're thinking about it now?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, at the beginning, everything was on fire. So the first use case, I believe, for compressed NFTs was Helium. Helium has hotspots, physical devices, and then they use compressed NFTs to represent them on chain, which is pretty cool because generally NFTs are like pictures of apes, but in this case it was like actual physical devices. And so since then, there's been a lot of interest in kind of ways to represent compressed NFTs and how to think about them. I think Vib has he tweeted one day that like he thinks of compressed NFTs as like content, which is pretty cool. So the design space is, previously we were pretty limited by the design space, right? You were basically limited to like 10, 20K collections. Now you can use compressed NFTs to model pretty much anything in reality. anything from items in games, ticketing. Teleport, the ride-sharing app, even wants to use it for governance tokens so that you can vote. So now there's a vast design space, and it's always hard going from like 0 to 1 and thinking about these things from first principles. But I think as we work through it over the next few years, there's going to be a lot of cool things being built.
Totally. Just to double click on the thing that Vibu posted, I find it actually pretty inspiring. It's a reasonably long tweet, but he's talking about how he kind of switched his mindset from scarcity as the cool, interesting thing to abundance, and how abundance allows for all sorts of different use cases. And in the context of smart contracts and blockchains and all that sort of stuff, it means that any issuance of any kind of asset can then be composed with the rest of the ecosystem. So that's kind of what you're getting at, is once you have these use cases and you can issue all these things, suddenly all these things show up. They just are free, including marketplaces. I would love to hear a little bit more about how you first, got on that journey of thinking about what that would look like for Tensor. Obviously, why that was an important decision for you all, and how you strategically think about it for your product and for your business.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for us as a marketplace, obviously, like the 10K PFP, the 10K collectibles, NFTs, and the meta actually does most of our volume, right? If you look at the Tensor, top 100 collections by 24-hour volume, most of them are regular NFTs. cNFTs in the millions may not actually be trading much, right? Like, I would reckon there's probably 70 to 80% of cNFTs minted out there, actually probably even more, that never trade hands. That being said, I think for us as Tensor, while we're focused on revenue, we're focused on trading, we're focusing on generating fees, I think the most important thing for us to answer is, how are Solana NFTs different from NFTs on any other chain? How can Solana become differentiated from Ethereum NFTs, the 10K PFP meta which started there? How can we use the technology on Solana, which is fast, cheap transactions, and now really cheap NFTs, and differentiate ourselves from Ethereum and actually push that meta forward? Because for us, Tensor, we're Solana first, and we're going to be Solana first for a while, and we want to be able to push the boundaries of what Solana can do, because that's how we build a big business. And yes, in the short term, there's not going to be a lot of trading, there's not going to be a lot of fees, but I think it's really cool to work with this tech, and maybe we'll find that product market fit with cNFTs that actually have a lot of trading volume that's actually relevant to us. But I mean, yeah, it's very cool to see what Drip is doing. Even some of the legendary collectibles within these massive jobs are trading for 5, 10 Sol, and that's pretty cool to see.
Totally. I think accessibility is a huge piece of that story. And if we look at sort of the broader crypto industry and the people that are even receiving Drip collectibles, the pie is too small to really think about scarcity in this context. So as we look at it, it's really not one person with 1 million NFTs. I expect it's going to be 1 million people with one NFT, right? And how does that economy of scale work on the Solana blockchain? Question for, and this is going to be mostly for Keith and Richard, but I'm thinking a little bit about games. Like, where are we seeing games and people using these digital assets in the context of video games or metaverse or whatever it is that you've seen so far?
So I'll say it. I mean, cNFTs are absolutely perfect for gaming. I've been dabbling with game dev on and off for like 2 decades at this point. And what is a game asset? A game asset is a picture or animation. It's regular data, stats, health, all that other stuff, which is all present on cNFTs. And finally, with cNFTs, as over regular NFTs, we reach the point where we have an economy of scale. No one's going to be paying a ton of money to mint regular NFTs as your gaming assets. So for example, I have a trading card game. A deck of 60 of these as NFTs would cost me 1.2 Sol. So, depending on the day, that would be like $10 to $1,000, depending on the price of Sol. But for cNFTs, you can mint millions of those, which makes it totally feasible to do entirely digital assets for stuff like card games or assets or like monetary currency within games. And we also inherit awesome infrastructure like Tensor and all the other cool staking programs or all the other interactions on chain that come with it. So you no longer need to build everything from scratch for gaming.
That makes sense. I've seen a lot of people using this technology to represent things like collectibles as well. Trading card games is the most obvious one, and being able to create decks and have all this software that's around it, but knowing that those are actual assets that you could trade for and buy and stuff like that. Anything that you've heard from the Tensor side?
Yeah, I like that you mentioned trading card game because that is literally a game for trading, right? In the form of cards. I think what was basically not possible with regular NFTs before was that people couldn't mint basically, the Pokemon-style drops with these booster packs, in the millions, where every person could have, their own starter deck. But then you also have, the more collectible, the stuff that people actually trade. I think it's interesting with cNFTs because you can get all of that basically for free. You can take there's basically no risk for you as a trading card game developer or any game developer if you're doing, a standard virtual game. To just mint all of these as cNFTs because it'll cost you $100 for 1 million NFTs, right? And you get to experiment, and you don't have to worry about paying, all the rent or I guess, all the SOL to mint these regular NFTs. And for us, that's interesting because we want to see more use cases like trading card games, even like MMORPGs. If you think about I'm a huge gamer, and back in the day, I would play MMORPGs. But I was more of the guy who would trade stuff on the marketplace, right? On these marketplaces. And so that's very close to home in that I want to play games and I want to trade these assets. And if you have a lot of these assets, it wouldn't make sense to do it on any other chain because it's just too expensive. Whereas cNFTs is the answer to all of that.
Totally. I'm very much waiting for someone to recreate RuneScape with digital assets on chain. So that's a free idea that you can take with you as you go. Mert, as you've been listening to people using compression through your services, what are some of the cool ideas that the abundance of these assets now allows you to build?
Yeah, I think my favorite is actually and I'm not just saying this because it's this event, but I think it's Vib's idea of NFTs as content, where you have these channels and you have these artists and you kind of have this relationship with kind of nobody in the middle, and you're just facilitated with the infrastructure itself. You kind of it makes you rethink what NFTs are. They're actually very abstract and extendable things. And I think, for example, sports moments, right? I think that's a cool one. If you're a sports fan and you want to collect sports moments, that's actually how I would say maybe the last NFT or crypto bull run started with NFT, NBA Top Shot, yeah. And so now you can actually do that at better scale. And so, that's content. It's kind of abstract, but I think that's my favorite use case. And okay, so Render Network has a very interesting, this might be a little too technical, but Render Network is like a GPU network, and they want to use compressed NFTs to represent scene graphs, right? So literal scene graphs on chain, which is crazy in my view that you can even do that. But that's kind of the scale that this allows for, right? And it's not really possible on any other chain either. So pretty exciting stuff.
That's cool. I've definitely heard a lot of these photographers using them to capture a scene graph, the negatives that go into a photo shoot, and being able to do all that, not having to foot the bill, make it really easy to keep track of that evolution and have all the provenance on chain. That's awesome.
Yeah.
For the other folks, what are some of the other cool ideas that you've heard from folks now that you have these products out in the wild?
One thing I've been talking about with a couple people is replacing email. cNFTs could be representative of something like cookies where, right now we're in the state of the world where we don't really own our data anymore. There's all this trading going on behind the scenes. Facebook is building huge social graphs that keep track of who you are and what ads to serve you. cNFTs kind of bring some of that power back that we've lost. And you can use it as a distribution mechanic, like Mert said. You can, because the wallet can be treated as an identity, you can then take that identity primitive, but also add permissions on top using some encryption and some of the awesome privacy tech we've seen arise around Solana, and really power that distribution and that data privacy stuff. That's cool.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if you guys went to the Network State Conference, but Balaji gave a talk, and there was a QR code, and it was a proof of active participation, a POAP. I don't like that acronym, but that was actually a compressed NFT behind the scenes. So you can do things that prove that you were in a certain place, that tie into kind of the identity stuff. I mean, I think you can pretty much do anything with compressed NFTs. Like it kind of almost blurs the line between what an NFT, like a non-fungible and a fungible is at some capacity. And so, yeah, I think like maybe the easier question is like, what can't you do with it? Yeah.
Update it.
One common theme. So I was chatting to someone from at a party yesterday. I think you introduced me to him. But he was thinking of doing ad tech on Solana using cNFTs. And that's really cool because his idea is that instead of having these passive ads on Instagram or any like social media platform, what you can do is actually have the user engage with whatever product or brand is actually doing the advertising by getting them to come and claim a cNFT. Yes, they may not be worth much, or they might not be worth anything, and maybe the user doesn't care about it. What's interesting is that now you're holding assets from a brand that is trying to reach out to you. And maybe that's also a way to track, like, okay, this person claimed a cNFT from my brand, I can target them later. Maybe I do give them something more I guess, valuable, like a coupon code in the form of a token or a coupon code in the form of a cNFT. And that sort of generates this nice flywheel where it's one, a targeting mechanism, two, it's like an engagement mechanism. And I think it makes a lot of sense to do all of that in crypto because you can see who actually owns the wallet or who actually owns the assets and in which wallets.
Yeah, and just two more use cases I thought of. Well, one social. I'm sure everybody's seen Friendtech, but you can use compressed NFTs to represent interactions like likes and relationships and messages. So that's one. And then another one that I found interesting is like real-world assets. In a sense, Todd was talking about representing barrels of whiskey as compressed NFTs and kind of tracking them throughout the world, which is apparently a thing and a very cool thing. So like real-world assets is another one where you can represent things like directly that you see like with barrels of whiskey with compressed NFTs.
Yeah, just to add on that particular example, Todd runs Baxis, and what they do is that they tokenize whiskey and spirits. They'll take delivery of that whiskey, they'll analyze the authenticity, make sure that it's actually whiskey, and then they'll vault it. They'll vault it and then tokenize it and issue that back to the person that owns that particular thing. Now, what's really cool about this is that it's a perfect example of why the tokenization leads into composability. Because in that vault, there's a Helium node that's sitting there, keeping track of the state, making sure that the place that it's in is maintained a particular temperature, all that sort of stuff. From the collector's standpoint, now you have this liquidity marketplace that you can see all of these different options. And if you are someone that owns, I don't know, like a $20,000 bottle of whiskey, you can actually collateralize a loan against it using something like Bridge Split, right? You could take a tool like NeoSwap, and NeoSwap will suggest barters. So it'll be like, hey, you have 2 bottles of this, I got a bottle of this dude's got 4 bottles of this. Let's suggest a trade, like a multi-party trade. So now, for the first time, these real-world assets are able to trade just as easily as the things that we're seeing in the NFT sort of JPEG side of things. All the technology that is built around NFTs can just work with any kind of token. And so there's all these cool things that are showing up in the NFT space as a result of improving the technology, making it more accessible.
So are we meeting up for compressed whiskey after this?
What's that?
Are we meeting up for compressed whiskey after this? Because I'm
compressed whiskey, yes. yes. That one's my favorite sort of example of composability in the real world because now those people they don't have to know anything about crypto. And this is actually showing up in a lot of different real world asset teams where the people who they sign up with an email, all that sort of stuff, but they're getting this complex, vibrant product as a result, and they don't need to worry that, hey, it's being worked with all these different protocols and things like that.
I think when you mentioned that this is almost, I guess, more ways to onboard Web2 users. I mean, one of the important things with onboarding Web2 users is you don't want them to be paying for transaction fees or rent, right? If you want to give someone, a coupon code or want to ask them to buy whiskey, like they'll be weirded out if you ask them for a bit of Solana to pay for rent, to create this NFT. Like that's just not going to happen in the Web2 world. They're used to stuff just working without them having to, basically hand over their credit card to do anything. cNFTs unlock that, right? We can subsidize, or any of us could subsidize the cost of creating these cNFTs because they're so cheap. Regular NFTs, you can't really do that. And so I think that's one of the exciting use cases. It's almost like a narrative to onboard Web2 users.
Totally. You can flip the narrative. I know Dialect does this really well. You can collect the stickers without having any tokens or even needing to know what that is. Right? So it's a great onboarding mechanism for folks that are brand new to the space. And yeah, they probably shouldn't be buying tokens as the very first thing that they do in any product. Yeah. I'm curious, what do we think is going to show up in like 3, 4, or 5 years when there are billions and billions of things? What do we think is the thing that we haven't seen yet that will maybe show up in that time frame?
I think we kind of see hints of it now with loyalty programs. I've already had a couple brands reach out to me and ask if there's a way they can reward their customers using cNFTs. These brands want to be in this space. They want to be in Web3. They recognize that this is the future, decentralization, ownership, all of those primitives, and they want to try it out. They want to pilot it. They don't want to put a huge amount of money into a test, but cNFTs enable them to do it for a cost-effective manner. Use cNFTs instead of those punch cards that, you just go home, you buy a star-shaped punch hole, and you cheat. But like cNFTs, the ownership is there, the provenance is there, all that stuff is stored on-chain.
Totally. Yeah, I think major brands that have lots of different points of access, maybe they have TV, they have in-person like things, all of those struggle to do exactly what you talked about, which is loyalty. How do you keep track of a sports fan across every screen and every interaction that they have? But why not like airdrop them a geo-fenced, proof of attendance that you were at the bar watching a game, and then allowing that to be a discount at the point of sale when you get to the stadium, or vice versa, or your jerseys have all these things. Like, again, that proliferation and abundance of those assets really breaks open the product space. There's this, like you said, what can't we build with this stuff? Yeah.
And to your question of like what can be built with this thing in the next 3 to 5 years, AAA kind of quality games generally take very long to build. I think like Elder Scrolls or like Skyrim took like 8 years to build on its own, like pretty crazy stuff. And so I think as kind of gaming companies, like existing ones like Ubisoft and whatnot, take NFTs more seriously, they're gonna look at compressed NFTs and be like, okay, what can we do with this? And I can see them maybe enabling new use cases that were impossible before. And then, maybe crypto native games like Loot, for example, that was a big one that most people didn't really see coming. So there's a lot of like interesting 0 to 1 moments there that, if you could predict them, that would be a very easy business for other people as well. But one thing that I like, Crossmint. Crossmint works with a lot of like big enterprises, and I think they work with like FIFA to represent some things like maybe sports moments or tickets as represent NFTs. And Keith was mentioning loyalty, so that's kind of goes hand in hand with that. But I think everybody's maybe thinking about it right now as maybe a distribution mechanism, which is valid, and in gaming, which is also valid. But like I want to go back to the render network. Like the scene graph example is, I didn't even know what a scene graph was, and so being able to like knowing that you can actually represent that with something on chain, and it's like, okay, now what else can we represent on chain that's inefficient in the real world? And whiskey barrels, like that's a crazy one. And I think maybe like supply chain stuff going forward could be interesting as well. I know that's always like the OG use case of blockchains, for private blockchains at least. So yeah, I'd be happy to have this chat again in 3 years and see what's happened.
We'll see which bets paid off. One thing that I have heard about, I'm curious to hear some thoughts on, is with AI being a big source of new content, with the sort of lack of credit or the lack of provenance of the things that go into those models, content authenticity has been a really critical part for creators, both in the both the source stuff and the generative stuff. And I'm just curious, like, how would that fit in a world where we have these plentiful digital assets?
I think that's very interesting because I think when people think of NFTs, or at least when the average person thinks of an NFT, a large value prop is the provenance and the integrity that this is the one and only version of this. I think like one thing is, of course, you can just like right-click and save Bored Ape and mint it as a separate NFT. And a lot of people do that, right? We see a lot of fake collections. Maybe Bored Ape was a bad example. Maybe I should have said Mad Lads. There's probably a lot of a ton of like fake Mad Lads collections out there, and yes, people like will see that, oh, this is a Mad Lads, this person is using this IP. But what's interesting is that if there's a company or brand that wants to work with Mad Lads to do a lot of interesting partnerships that generates revenue, and because Mad Lads is providing these brands and these companies with distribution, you can always trace it back to the original holders. Let's say Mad Lads decides to split their partnership revenue with all the Mad Lads holders. They can always trace it back to the original owner, right? And I think like you can't do that in Web 2, right? Like if someone like outside of I don't know, some IP brand out there like Pokemon, let's say Pokemon decides to sell their IP and gives it to the community, it's very hard without talking to Pokemon directly to funnel all of that revenue, funnel all of the royalties back to the original holders.
Yeah, actually, John, talking about maybe your last question, the 3 to 5 years, and actually AI is a perfect example that I just thought of now. I was watching an episode of Blacklist, which is a TV show with, a criminal, let's say, and one of the things that happens in it, and this show was filmed like 5, 6 years ago, I think this episode, is this hacker group doctors a video of this guy and then him committing a crime, and then he gets arrested after, and like. I'm not saying that'll happen in our world, but I mean probably. But and with AI now, you can do some very interesting stuff. Some of it good, some of it bad, and maybe this is actually maybe longer than 5 years. Maybe let's say 10 years. But I can probably see a world where on-chain identity is a bit more common, and maybe it's used as a starting place for many things. And then if you want to represent authentic like content from that identity, maybe use a compressed NFT to represent that, and then you kind of it's going to be hard to doctor stuff, and authenticity is going to be kind of feels dystopian a little bit, but I think if you do get there, compressed NFTs could help for sure.
I actually don't think that's a 10-year thing. I think that's like a 1-year thing. I think like next year there's going to be. This is a US-centric thing, but there's going to be an election. There's going to be all sorts of crazy stuff happening now that AI is so powerful that I think that there's a very real world that every single video that goes out has to be minted with provenance and has all the attribution information, and so that it cannot be doctored because one single word changes the entire structure of a sentence, which changes the entire stance of a politician or something like that. So I think that's actually probably going to happen sooner rather than later. And there's going to be a lot of that happening all around the world, for sure.
Yep. I think maybe an interesting example is when, I'm not sure if you saw on Twitter, but somebody was posing as a reporter that was like interviewing Caroline Ellison and was like, oh yeah, Solana has an on and off switch, and everybody believed it, but totally fake tweet.
Fake tweet, no sound bites.
Yeah, I know we talked about sort of the negative side effects of AI, but I think what's interesting is that crypto is kind of the natural platform for AI to like thrive. If you think about almost like derivative work, like creative stuff that is not like meant to mislead people. Like we're not talking about creating an AI video of like Barack Obama saying something very controversial. We're talking about people doing interesting things, maybe with the drops that Drip is doing with a ton of artists, and they want to create derivative work. And maybe part of that agreement is, okay, yes, you can use AI and all the technology to create cool art that's based on these existing works. But whatever revenue you make, let's share it with everyone else who's actually holding the original artwork. And so there's almost like this very like digital native way to perhaps even transfer value that is being produced by these derivative works back to the original artists, back to the original holders.
A perfect example of this is like Instagram Reels, TikTok, whatever I actually don't use TikTok. The remix is part of it, but everything gets lost, right? If you were the first person to start a meme and that got remixed 1 million times, you don't really get that credit. Maybe you see the thing, but then maybe they block it with a little white box or something like that, and suddenly the thing that you did is gone, and everyone's derivatives work, is the one that gets all the credit. But yeah, you could say, hey, every time you do this, we keep track of it, which requires abundance. It requires digital assets that can be proliferated. And
right, and that's been a problem for YouTube creators for at least a decade. Somebody who sees the video uploaded real quick will upload it to Reddit. They'll get like 1 million hits. Then the actual creator will get a chance to upload it, and they'll get nothing because it's already done its full cycle. If you can make the content inherently tied to profitability or any sort of income or hits or tracking, then you remove that problem.
Totally. This is great. I think this is like for creators. I mean, obviously it's early. These are new technologies, and having to navigate all this is it's like us. Like, oh hey, like this adding up all these ideas and figuring it all out on the fly. But I'm hoping that this is something that we can kind of solidify over time, and that it makes it a lot easier for people to make the choice, or just you don't have to make the choice at all. It's just easy. It just is there, and it just works on the Solana blockchain or something like that. What else? What are the other things that folks think is in the future for compressed NFTs?
So I'm pretty optimistic. I think in the near term, it's going to be primarily digital native stuff, and that will, I mean, for us, that'll probably be the predominant type of cNFTs or NFTs in general that will be traded on Tensor. I think if you think about like what crypto offers to the world, I think the most obvious thing is better payment rails, better ways of transferring value, cross-border, between your friends, and the financialization of all of that stuff. So I think like if you think about like real-world items, a lot of this stuff is already financialized, but they're very disparate, right? If you think about buy now, pay later in the real world, you can buy Peloton. You have to choose between like, I don't know, 10 different buy now, pay later options. That being said, let's say there's an open market for anyone to essentially give a loan out on that Peloton. And let's say there's a cNFT attached to it, so that there's an obvious way to associate that asset in the real world with the financialization of that asset. And I think that's exciting for us because we're all about financialization, we're about trading, maybe we get into other types of financialization. But all of that can only be done with cNFTs because it would be insane to try to like create an NFT for every single Peloton in existence.
Totally true. Mert?
Yeah, so that's a good use case. And then maybe along a similar line, I think DPIN, which is a weird acronym, but it stands for Decentralized Physical Infrastructure Networks. Helium, the mobile network, is a good example where you represent hotspots that people have to like enable internet and whatever connections with compressed NFTs. But that's obviously just one example, and Solana has much more DPIN activity coming to it. So Hive Mapper is a decentralized version of, let's say, Google Maps, where people who have people can get a dash cam and put it on their car, and then it maps the world. But then you also get reward for doing it with tokens, and you can actually represent the dash cam with compressed NFTs as well. And the whiskey example that you gave was good as well, because you can use a Helium device to monitor like a whiskey, which is also a compressed NFT, so it can get very, very composable. And like the thing with these things is network effects, right? Once you have kind of maybe 1, 2, or 3 companies doing this, other companies start seeing, they're like, wait a minute, this is pretty cool, and we can build, because they already chewed the glass for us. And so once you kind of get the initial inertia removed, I think it just accelerates. And so if you guys are kind of thinking about compressed NFTs now, like this is actually the perfect time to experiment before they really start to accelerate, because these things kind of have like a exponential curve as opposed to like a linear curve, right? So yeah.
Keith?
Yeah, I think that's really the TLDR for everything, is just like cNFTs can be whatever you want them to be. They can encompass everything. The value is there. The scalability, the cost savings, the management is all there. It's just up to us to make everything easy, chew all the glass for everyone else.
Makes total sense. So there is one thing that I think is probably on everyone's minds, or at least it's on my mind, is the name. What's up with the name? Did we just screw up and name it poorly? Is this engineers naming things? And it was engineers naming things. So I know that this is an important point. Like, what is the C in cNFTs and why does it matter? I'm hoping it doesn't, but I'd love to get a sense. When can we just start calling them NFTs?
I mean, I've been pushing on that. Well, we've been trying to push on that for a while. It's funny because I don't know if you guys heard of Tensorians. That's sort of our PFP collection. It's basically our way to create a community around Tensor, the platform, and almost like the narrative. We basically initially came out and said, OK, we're going to do an NFT collection, right? We're not going to do a cNFT collection. We want to do an NFT collection that a bunch of users on Tensor can get access to. And I think that's really important because I think in the long term, once there is enough technical support from guys like Helius, who's building all the data infrastructure, from guys like Metaplex, who's building all the on-chain stuff, like this is no different like in theory, like the applications that are possible with cNFTs, or the applications that are possible with NFTs right now should be possible with cNFTs. And if everything else is cheaper, faster, it's easier. Eventually, once the infra gets there, it's easier to use, perhaps. Then, like, we should be just treating these like regular NFTs, and they may become the predominant standard going forward.
Yeah. Fun fact, talking about the cNFT and NFT thing, I have a Tensorian, and I did not know they were compressed NFTs until today. But yeah, I think like I saw Vib talk about this. cNFTs is kind of a weird name. Why don't we just call it NFTs? And I mean, why we even call them NFTs? It's just nobody really understands what those are.
That's a topic for another day. I'm sure we can find a better name than NFTs.
So we actually internally we call the old NFT standard legacy NFTs, and we call compressed NFTs NFTs. So,
Interesting.
Yeah, naming is hard.
yeah.
Yeah.
I'm a terrible person to ask because Bubblegum, the program that powers the NFTs, I love the name. I love the candy names. I fight for them every day. But yeah, I mean, that's one thing. Like, I think Austin was the one who named it. The Digital Asset Standard API is the thing that powers the indexing for cNFTs. And I think we should just call them assets, honestly, at this point. We've seen with gaming and some recent drama that like even the name NFT doesn't really make a whole lot of sense if you break down the acronym. So, I mean, they're really just assets. That's what they are at any scale.
Naming things after what they're not is kind of strange. So. Cool. So any last thoughts before we open it up to a couple questions?
No, but I mean, like I said earlier, now is kind of the time to play around with, compressed NFTs. Go on Drip, go on Tensor, check it out, see what people are building, maybe build off of their work. If you're a developer, there's a lot of infrastructure that Helius and Metaplex have built that you can play around with and get started with. There's a bunch of documentation. And yeah, I think it's just a really good kind of open or blank canvas that you can just start experimenting and doing weird stuff with, and I'm sure one of them will take off and kind of be the next thing.
Yeah, my DMs are always open if anyone has any issues, questions, anything like that. Always happy to help out.
If you guys want to get your collection listed on Tensor, just like hit us up, DMs.
We have time for one, maybe two questions. Any questions in the audience?
What's left on the cNFT roadmap to bring it completely up to the NFT standards? Because I know a lot of our creators are very interested in like updating their metadata and things like that.
Sure. So update is right around the corner. We're finishing up a lot of that. I think Michael's in the audience who's been like literally running tests while he's at Breakpoint before he goes to parties to get that out because we know people want that to get out the door. I think this is a good chance to remove a lot of the cruft that accumulated in token metadata. So a lot of things are missing, like additions or royalty enforcement or things like that. And this is the time for creators to speak up if they want some of that transferred over, if they want to try a new collection standard or a new edition standard where everything is just part of the same collection and immutable. We could definitely do that. So like really, we'll bring over whatever creators ask for because that's who our top priority is.
I think the three sort of buckets of features that I'd like or just capabilities are around non-transferability for things like badges and accomplishments, the ability to make things, sorry, that was the soul-bound ones, making them immutable as well I think is really critical. And then some like nicer tools around things like batch minting. There's something really cool to me about the idea of a game being able to maybe operate their own servers or something like that and post Merkle roots and sorry, wow, I was the one that made it technical. Providing all that information to Solana, but games have millions and millions and millions of digital assets. So being able to introduce those in more sort of gradual ways to the Solana network over time.
I think the biggest thing that I'm seeing is more ecosystem support. We were the first to move as a marketplace on cNFTs, and then that's sort of like, we like to think this way, but I think it's just like general ecosystem support for something that is like only possible on Solana. A lot of the wallets started to integrate cNFTs. Matrica, we worked with them to get cNFT verification into Discord. If you're a developer, start building cool tools around cNFTs. I think like the vertical use cases, like doing ad tech for with the cNFTs. I think that needs to happen. Someone needs to build that. Yeah.
Cool.
Yep. I mean, you know what I'm going to say. We do need to do a lot more work on the infrastructure so that Drip never has to worry about us ever again. But yeah.
Cool. Great. Well, that's all the time we have. Thank you so much for listening.